Reborn at 15, stepsister tore her dress to frame me. I smashed her into the rocks and kicked her into the pond. That's real bullying. Play the full story in one go. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. The exciting story begins right now. Rip, the sharp sound of tearing silk echoed beside the rockery in the backyard of the minister's manor, piercing the silence of the early spring afternoon. I was dazed for a moment. The excruciating pain of having my tendons and bones brutally severed seemed to still linger within my marrow, causing my fingertips to tremble slightly. But in the next instant, as the scene before me gradually came into focus, my blood suddenly ran cold. Standing before me was my delicate and affected younger half-sister, Wei Yuan. She was gripping the hem of her skirt, which had been torn nearly in half, revealing the snow-white inner garment beneath. On that face, usually the picture of piteous vulnerability, there now hung a cold and triumphant sneer. "Eldest sister," she whispered, her voice low and provocative, audible only to the two of us. "Tell me, when brother and the heir arrive in a moment and see that you, consumed by jealousy, tore my clothes in public and tried to push me into the water, what do you think they will feel?" A gust of chilly early spring wind blew past, the cold seeping deep into my skin. I have been reborn, returning to the day of my 15th birthday banquet. In my previous life, it was from this very moment that my life devolved into a joke, a desperate struggle to prove my innocence to people who refused to believe me. Wei Yuan used this exact, clumsy self-harm tactic, throwing herself mercilessly into the bone-chilling pond. My biological brother, Yan Jing, and my fiancé, Rong Ju, rushed over at the sound, refusing to listen to a single word of my explanation. Yan Jing slapped me hard in public, cursing me as a venomous woman. Rong Ju looked at me with a condescending gaze of utter disgust, as if I were a pile of foul-smelling sludge. The more I cried and insisted it wasn't me, the more they became convinced of my malice. Ultimately, this pathological prejudice evolved into the tragedy of my past life, where I was flayed and my bones crushed. Seeing my silence, Wei Yuan assumed I was paralyzed with fear. A cold, triumphant smirk curled at the corner of her mouth, which she instantly replaced with a mask of sheer terror. Her body tilted backward as she let out a piercing scream toward the pebble path beyond the rockery. "Elder sister, no!" Wanner knows she was wrong. Wanner will never dare to make elder sister angry again. Ah. Wei Yuan closed her eyes, preparing to follow the plan and fall backward into the chilling pond. Asterisk slap. Asterisk there was no expected splash of water, only the crisp sound of flesh striking flesh. I lunged forward, my right hand like an iron vice, death gripping her meticulously styled hair. "You." Wei Yuan's body froze midair, the searing pain tearing at her scalp forcing her eyes wide open. "Since you're so intent on framing me for bullying my concubine-born sister." I stared at her face, contorted in pain, my voice soft yet cold as a poison-dipped blade. "Wouldn't it be quite heartless of me, as your elder legitimate sister, not to oblige you?" Before the words had even faded, I gave her no room to react. Gripping her hair, I threw the full strength of my arm into a violent swing, slamming her head hard against the sharp, jagged edge of the nearby Taihu stone. Bang! The dull thud of the impact was enough to set one's teeth on edge. "Ah!" Wei Yuan erupted in a piercing, blood-curdling scream. This time, she wasn't faking. The pain was truly agonizing. Crimson blood instantly burst from her temple, snaking down her pale cheeks and dripping onto her self-torn collar, a shocking sight to behold. Completely dazed by the blow, her legs gave way, and she collapsed to the ground like a heap of mud. Clutching her forehead, she stared at me in sheer terror, as if looking at a completely unrecognizable demon. "ELD, elder sister." She trembled violently, tears mingling with blood as they fell. The act she had prepared was now completely forgotten, replaced only by the raw instinct for survival. I looked down at her from my height, the agony of being carved open piece by piece in my past life roiling and roaring in the depths of my heart. Compared to the hatred of my previous life, what did this little bit of blood even matter? I slowly raised my foot, and the sole of my exquisite embroidered shoe pressed down mercilessly onto her pitiful face, grinding her head deep into the mud. "Remember," I leaned down, looking into her despairing eyes as I spoke each word with deliberate emphasis. This is what bullying actually looks like. With that, I applied force to my toe and delivered a sharp, brutal kick straight to her chest. Asterisk thud. Asterisk water splashed everywhere. I kicked Yen Yuan into the bone-chilling pond of early spring like a tattered sack. She thrashed desperately in the water as the freezing liquid instantly filled her nose and mouth, causing her to cough violently, unable to even scream a full plea for help. I stood on the bank, watching her struggle with cold eyes, my clothes not even slightly disheveled. The suffocating urge to explain myself that I felt in my past life was gone, replaced by the ultimate exhilaration of trampling my enemy underfoot. Just then, I suddenly felt a strange chill creeping up my back. It was a gaze that felt intensely aggressive. I snapped my head back, my gaze piercing through the intricate hollows of the rockery, shooting straight toward a blind spot in its deepest recesses. Amidst the shifting light and shadows, I caught sight of a corner of a dark gold sleeve embroidered with cloud patterns. It was the silhouette of a man. A pair of well-defined, slender, and pale hands were nonchalantly toying with a blood-jade thumb ring of the finest quality. And those narrow, deep eyes were staring at me without blinking for even a second. The Grand Secretary of the Imperial Court, Wei Yuan, a name that even Yen Zheng and Rongju dared not provoke in my past life, instantly flashed through my mind. What was he doing here? My heart trembled slightly, but I remained composed. After a brief, cold exchange of looks, I indifferently withdrew my gaze. Yuan, where are you? Outside the rockery, the sound of hurried, frantic footsteps approached, accompanied by a man's voice filled with extreme anxiety. Splash! Yanjing didn't even have time to take off his outer robe before plunging recklessly into the bone-chilling pond, firmly scooping Yen Yuan, who was still choking and struggling in the water, into his arms. Yuan, wake up! Yanjing climbed onto the bank, cradling the soaking wet Yen Yuan, whose forehead was still bleeding incessantly. He untied his own damp outer robe and wrapped it tightly around the shivering figure in his arms. Yen Yuan's face was deathly pale as she leaned weakly against Yen Zheng's chest. Her eyes were as red as a rabbit's. When her gaze swept over me, she flinched with perfect timing. She then clutched Yen Zheng's lapels, sobbing so hard she could barely breathe. Brother, don't blame elder sister. It was Warner's own carelessness that caused me to hit my head and slip. Elder sister didn't tear my clothes, and she didn't try to kill me. The more she acted the part of the aggrieved victim, the more the fury in Yen Zheng's eyes blazed. He whipped his head around, glaring at me with bloodshot eyes. Suddenly, he lunged to his feet and raised his hand, swinging it violently toward my face. Yen Shu, you poisonous, cold-blooded woman, Warner is your own sister, yet you dared to strike her with such lethal intent. The wind from his palm whistled toward me, carrying a force that showed no mercy. I didn't panic and offer explanations as I had in the past, nor did I stand there like a fool to take the blow. I shifted my body slightly and took a half step back, causing Yen Zheng's full force slap to hit nothing but air. Because he had overextended himself and the ground was slick, he stumbled forward several steps, nearly falling flat on his face in a pathetic heap. You still dare to dodge? Yen Zheng steadied himself and looked at me in disbelief, as if my failure to stand still and take his blow was an unpardonable capital offense. I coldly brushed non-existent dust off my cuffs, my gaze sweeping over his face, which was contorted with rage. My voice remained calm, without a single ripple of emotion. Brother is in such a hurry to pass judgment. Could it be that your brain was submerged in the pond water along with you and is now waterlogged? Yen Zheng's face turned livid, choked by my merciless sarcasm. Enough! Haven't you disgraced yourselves enough already? A majestic, angry shout echoed from the archway. My father, Minister Yen, strode forward surrounded by several head housekeepers. His face was grim as he scanned the chaotic scene. His gaze paused briefly upon seeing the blood on Yen Yuan's head before he glared fiercely at me. Take this wretched creature to the ancestral hall. Send for a physician to treat the second young lady's injuries immediately. Half an hour later, at the minister's ancestral hall, I stood ramrod straight in the center of the hall. My back as unyielding as a pine tree, with no intention of kneeling. Rebellious girl, kneel. Seated in his grand armchair, My father slammed his hand down on the red sandalwood table, causing the teacups to rattle sharply. Your mother passed away early, and I entrusted you to the governesses to be carefully raised. Was it so they could teach you how to harm your own sibling? If your brother hadn't arrived today, were you planning to drown Water alive in that pond? Father, you didn't even bother to ask a single question before deciding that I was the one trying to harm her? I looked coldly at my furious father seated in the high hall, feeling nothing but a sense of sorrowful irony in my heart. Elder sister. Hearing this, Yen Yuan wept even more piteously. Water knows that elder sister has always looked down upon my status as a daughter of a concubine. But today is elder sister's birthday. Water only wanted to gift you a hand-embroidered sachet and had no intention of overstepping. Why did elder sister have to tear my clothes and drive me to such a desperate end? Shut up. You might not be tired of acting, but I'm nauseated just watching you. I interrupted her tearful plea without a shred of mercy. Amidst the shocked gazes of everyone present, I slowly stepped forward 2 paces, pointing at the torn dress that had been set aside by a maidservant as evidence. I let out a cold laugh. Father, you have presided over criminal trials in the imperial court for many years. Can you truly not see the flaws in this dress? That fabric is the newly tribute Yinxia brocade from Suzhou and Hangzhou, known for its excellent durability. If I had torn it with my bare hands, the edges would be jagged and the threads pulled. But look at that tear, it is so smooth that there isn't even a single stray thread. It is clear that someone used scissors to snip a notch in the seam beforehand, so that a gentle tug would cause it to rip wide open. I leaned in slightly, meeting Yen Yuan's momentarily panicked gaze, and said word by word, "Go search the sleeve pocket of the second young lady's personal maid. See if there is still a pair of shears hidden inside, stained with the silk threads of the rosy cloud brocade." As soon as these words were spoken, the maid beside Yen Yuan turned deathly pale and collapsed to the ground with a heavy thud. My father's expression instantly became extremely unsightly. He had clearly seen through the scheme, but for the sake of appearances, he didn't know how to speak up for a moment. Enough! Seeing that things were taking a turn for the worse, Yan Jing immediately stepped forward and shouted sternly, "Even if the dress was accidentally ruined by water, what about the injury on her forehead? What about the water in the pond? Did she hit herself and jump in herself? Yan Shu, you are simply twisting words and being utterly malicious." Looking at my own flesh and blood brother standing before me, the man who was trying to condemn me to death with every word he spoke, I suddenly burst out laughing. "What are you laughing at?" Yan Jing snapped, stung by my laughter, his gaze growing increasingly sinister. "I'm laughing at how pathetically stupid you are." I pulled back my smile, staring at him as if looking at a corpse. "You're right. The wound on her forehead was caused by me grabbing her hair and slamming her into the rockery. And her falling into the pond? I kicked her in myself." The ancestral hall fell into a sudden, deathly silence. My father's eyes widened in shock, and Yen Yuan even forgot to cry, staring at me in disbelief as if she hadn't expected me to admit it so bluntly. Since she went to such great lengths to shred her clothes just to frame me for bullying my concubine-born sister, wouldn't I be suffering this immense grievance for nothing if I didn't make the charge stick? I looked at Yan Jing, my voice cold and resolute. "My rules are simple. Whoever plots against me, I strike back. If you don't like it, deal with it." "Presumptuous!" my father roared in fury. "Someone, bring the family disciplinary rod. Today, I shall beat this unrepentant beast to death. I dare anyone to try," I shouted, forcing back the old maids who were stepping forward with rattan canes. I then drew a sharp dagger from my sleeve and slammed it onto the altar table with a loud thud. The blade shimmered with a chilling light, reflecting Yan Jing's horrified face. "Yan Jing, you keep calling me vicious and saying I'm not fit to be your sister. Fine. Have it your way." I looked him straight in the eye, my gaze no longer holding that old longing for a brother's understanding, leaving only a desolate, deathly silence. "From this day forward, you, Yan Zheng, are only Yan Yuan's good brother. Between you and me, Yan Shu, all ties are severed. We are strangers. If you ever dare use the status of an elder brother to lecture me again, I promise you, this knife will be buried in your precious little sister next time." Yan Zhang's pupils shrank instantly, and his entire body froze as if struck by lightning. Yan Shu, you are being far too insolent. A voice, gentle yet laced with an air of lofty superiority, drifted unhurriedly from outside the cracked open doors of the ancestral hall. Rong Ju, clad in a cyan brocade robe, stepped over the threshold. His gaze swept over Wei Yuan, who was kneeling on the ground, with lingering pity before freezing coldly upon my face. That look was as if he were staring at an utterly irrational, deranged woman. As the legitimate daughter of the minister's manor, your actions are so perverse and violent that you would even threaten your elder brother with a blade in public. Yan Shu, you have disappointed me deeply. If you kneel now and kowtow to one or to admit your wrongs, this marriage engagement may yet remain valid. Rongju's charitable tone still echoed above the ancestral hall, carrying a sense of condescending certainty. It was as if, so long as he was magnanimous enough not to break the engagement, I should be profoundly grateful to him, weeping as I knelt before Wei Yuan to kowtow and atone for my sins. In my previous life, I had indeed done exactly as he wished. To preserve this betrothal arranged since childhood and to ensure my late mother's efforts did not go to waste, I suppressed my revulsion and bowed my head to Wei Yuan. But what did that get me? It led to him and Yanjing joining forces to trample me into the mire. It led to the moment when, amidst Wei Yuan's near-death cries of pain, he, in his capacity as my fiancé, personally took a dagger and severed the tendons in my wrists, saying with feigned compassion, "Yan Shu, you are so malicious. If I do not disable you, you will surely bring ruin to the Marquis's household in the future." The phantom pains of the past seemed to stir faintly. I lowered my eyes and suddenly let out a short laugh. The laughter was freezing, sounding exceptionally jarring in the quiet, oppressive ancestral hall. Rongju knit his brows, a flash of displeasure crossing his eyes. "What are you laughing at? Have you gone mad?" I ignored him, instead slowly reaching into my sleeve to pull out the mutton-fat jade pendant, the token representing the status of the mistress of the Marquis of Schwamping's household. It was the pledge the old matriarch of the Marquis's manor had personally handed to me when our engagement was set years ago. "The heir is right," I said. "This marriage indeed should no longer count." Before the words had even finished leaving my lips, I loosened my grip. Asterisk slap. Asterisk the priceless mutton-fat jade pendant slammed violently against the bluestone tiles, shattering instantly into 1,000 pieces. Shards of jade flew everywhere, one even grazing Rongju's spotless black boots. The entire ancestral hall fell into a deathly silence. Yan even forgot to fake her crying, her tear-filled eyes widening in shock. Yanjing sucked in a sharp breath, while my father's face turned ashen. He lunged to his feet and pointed at me, his lips trembling uncontrollably. "Yan Shu, do you have any idea what you are doing?" The gentle mask Rongju always wore finally cracked. He stared at the shattered jade on the ground in disbelief, his voice trembling with the fury of being humiliated. "You dare to smash our token of betrothal in public? Do you think that by playing hard to get with these temper tantrums, I will actually coax you?" Playing hard to get? I reacted as if I had heard the most ridiculous joke in the world. I stepped toward him, my gaze like a blade carving inch by inch across his self-important face. "Rongju, you think far too highly of yourself. Do you truly believe that I, Yan Shu, cannot live without you? You, on one hand, you covet the 10 miles of red dowry and the immense wealth my maternal grandfather's family, the Chui clan, left for me, hoping to use my assets to fill the bottomless pit of your hollow marquisate. On the other hand, you are so deeply insecure that you cannot stand the fact that I, a legitimate daughter, am clearer-headed than you and refuse to cater to your chauvinistic whims." I lowered my voice, using a tone only those of us nearby could hear, piercing through his facade with surgical precision. "So, you went to Yanwan to find your manly dignity. You met privately in the peach blossom grove behind Xianghua Temple, and you exchanged longing glances at the poetry gatherings. Do you truly think everyone in this manor is blind?" As soon as these words were spoken, Rongju's face turned deathly pale, and a flash of panicked exposure flickered in his eyes. Yan, still kneeling on the ground, trembled violently and let out a shrill cry. "Elder sister, it is one thing for you to hate me. But why must you fabricate such slanders against my innocence and the young Marquise?" I would rather shave my head and become a nun than endure such a humiliating insult. Shut up! I whipped my head around, my icy gaze pinning Wei Yuan to the spot. If you truly had the backbone to shave your head, I would have someone hand you the scissors right now. Don't try to build a monument to your chastity while acting like a whore. You're pathetic. Fox-like charms can only deceive a fool like Yanjing, who fancies himself a savior, and a spineless coward like Rongju, who is as selfish as he is hypocritical. Presumptuous. Such foul language, you are nothing but a shrew. My father finally regained his breath. Shaking with rage, he roared, "Someone, come, bind this rebellious daughter, gag her, and throw her into the woodshed. No one is to give her a single drop of water without my permission. Tomorrow morning, I will personally escort her to the Marquis's manor to beg for forgiveness." Several coarse servant women immediately lunged forward like wolves and tigers, brandishing hemp ropes. I watched the approaching women coldly, my wrist turning as my palm gripped the dagger I had just slammed onto the altar table. Having lived a second life, if I couldn't even make it out of the gates of this minister's estate, I would have died in vain. At worst, I would draw blood today. As long as a life was lost, this marriage arrangement would be ruined all the same. Just as I was prepared to flip my hand and pierce the wrist of the first woman who rushed at me, "Master! Master!" The old butler of the minister's manor rushed into the ancestral hall courtyard, scrambling so frantically that he had lost a shoe. His face was as pale as paper, and his voice was distorted by sheer terror. My father frowned and barked sternly. "What is this unseemly panic? Can't you see I am administering family discipline?" "No, it's not that." The old butler collapsed to his knees outside the threshold, his Adam's apple bobbing violently. His trembling finger pointed toward the front courtyard. It's the Grand Secretary. Lord Wei Yuan's carriage has stopped right in front of our manor gates." "What?" My father cried out in shock, springing from his armchair so abruptly that he didn't even notice he had overturned his teacup. Rongju and Yan Zheng's expressions changed simultaneously, their eyes flashing with an identical sense of deep trepidation and awe. "What is Lord Wei doing here?" My father forced himself to sound calm, but his voice was trembling. The old butler swallowed hard, his gaze sweeping across the hall before finally landing on me, surrounded by the servant women, with a look of horror as if he had seen a ghost. The Grand Secretary's trusted personal guard said, "Lord Wei was touring the gardens at his manor today when he happened to catch a glimpse of the eldest Mrs. graceful bearing and was struck by her celestial beauty. He specifically ordered a gift to be delivered, explicitly stating it must be placed into the eldest Mrs. hands personally." Struck by her celestial beauty? As these words tumbled from the old butler's trembling mouth, they sounded as absurd as seeing a ghost in broad daylight. The fury on her father's face was instantly doused by a bucket of ice water, freezing into a look of utterly farcical terror. He stiffly turned his neck, staring fixedly at the butler. His lips quivered for a long time before he managed to squeeze a shattered voice from his throat. Who did you say?" "Grand Secretary. Grand Secretary Wei? It's the Grand Secretary's personal Jinui guards. They are waiting in the front hall this very moment." The old butler wiped the cold sweat from his forehead, slapping his thigh in agitation. "Master, please, go and greet them quickly. Extermination of the entire clan." These 5 words were like a guillotine hanging overhead, instantly shattering all of my father's authority. He whipped his head around, and the look in his eyes no longer held the ruthlessness from when he was about to enforce family discipline. Instead, it betrayed a deep sense of dread and helplessness. His mouth hung open as if he wanted to scold me to save some face, but when the words finally came out, they turned into a frantic, exasperated urge. "What are you standing there for? Hurry up and follow me to the front hall to receive the reward. If you dare utter a single word out of turn in front of Lord Wei's men, I will never forgive you." With that, he didn't even bother with the teacup shattered on the floor. Hoisting the hem of his official robes, he stumbled over the threshold of the ancestral hall and hurried toward the front courtyard at a near run. I watched his disheveled figure with cold indifference, slowly and methodically retracting the dagger pressed against the desk back into my sleeve. In my past life, I lived in constant fear within the walls of this grand estate, always believing that if I were virtuous, modest, and frugal enough, I could eventually earn a modicum of pity from my father and a shred of protection from my brother. It wasn't until the moment before my death that I realized in this dog-eat-dog world, compromising only turns you into prey to be trampled upon. Only absolute power and ruthlessness can make them kneel and tremble at your feet. Wei Yuan. My fingertips traced the cold hilt of the blade in my sleeve as the memory of those dark, playful eyes deep within the rockery resurfaced in my mind. This grand secretary, rumored to be violent, unpredictable, and with hands stained in blood, was this sudden reward of his a whim of mockery, or a calculated probe with deeper meaning? No matter what, I am determined to borrow this east wind of his. Eldest sister, supported by her maid, Yuan scrambled up from the ground, the white gauze on her forehead seeping a jarring, vivid crimson. She bit her lower lip hard, her eyes flickering with a mixture of jealousy and panic as she said in a trembling voice, "Lord Wei must have misunderstood something. If he knew how you just brutally beat your own sister in the backyard and how you defied your elders, he would surely rescind his order. Is that so?" I tilted my head, my gaze contemptuously sweeping over her pale face before glancing at Yanjing and Rongju, who stood beside her with equally dark and uncertain expressions. A mocking curve tugged at the corners of my lips. Then when we reached the front hall, "Dear sister, feel free to report me to Lord Wei's personal guards yourself. Let's see if they believe your crocodile tears, or the grace their master witnessed with his own eyes." I ignored their colorful expressions, brushed off my sleeves, and stepped out of the ancestral hall with a composed demeanor. By the time our group hurried to the front hall, the atmosphere inside had already dropped to freezing point. 2 rows of embroidered uniform guards, clad in flying fish robes with sprinkler and sabers hanging at their waists, stood lined up like wild geese wings. Their cold, murderous aura weighed so heavily on the hall that the maids and servants held their breath, not daring to make a sound. Standing in the very center was Wei Yuan's confidant, the assistant commissioner of the embroidered uniform guard, Lu Jing. Lu Jing had a cold, hard face, with a scar slashing down from his brow bone that added a touch of ferocity. He held a red sandalwood box wrapped in dark gold cloud-patterned silk. When he saw my father rushing forward in a cold sweat to bow, he merely lifted his eyelids indifferently and did not return the gesture. "Lord Lu's presence brings great honor to my humble home." My father offered a fawning smile, bowing and scraping. There was not a trace left of the authoritative minister who, just moments ago in the ancestral hall, had been threatening to beat and kill. "May I ask what gift the Grand Secretary has bestowed that required you to make this trip in person?" Lu Jing ignored his father's attempts to curry favor. His gaze, sharp as a falcon's, swept past the crowd and landed directly on me. I stepped forward calmly and gave a slight nod. My back remained perfectly straight, neither fawning nor showing any sign of intimidation. A flicker of surprise flashed through Lu Jing's eyes. He then took 2 steps forward and held a red sandalwood box out to me, pressing the latch open with a sharp click. The moment the contents of the box became clear, a collective gasp echoed through the hall. It was no ordinary piece of jewelry, but an exquisitely small and delicate dagger. The scabbard was encrusted with blood-red rubies. When drawn just an inch, the blade reflected a chilling, ghostly blue light. This was a genuine weapon, sharp enough to sever a falling hair and one that had tasted countless lives. Beside the dagger lay a snow-white, flawless silk handkerchief, folded with meticulous neatness. "Our master says." Lu Jing's voice was as cold and rigid as if he were proclaiming an imperial edict. Yet the words he uttered were so absurd they made one's scalp tingle. That while the strength the eldest miss displayed when striking that person by the rockery was commendable, the knife she carries is far too blunt. It would be a pity if she were to scratch her own delicate hands. "This blade, Cloud Piercer, is gifted to the eldest miss as a birthday present." At this point, Lu Jing paused, his gaze sweeping seemingly inadvertently over Yuan and Yanjing behind me, whose faces had turned pale in an instant, before adding, "As for this handkerchief, the master said that when you teach those sightless things a lesson in the future, remember to use it as a buffer, lest you soil your hands." Dead silence. A deathly silence spread throughout the vast front hall. This humble daughter thanks the Lord Grand Secretary for the gift. I extended my hand composedly, steadily taking the wooden box containing the murder weapon amidst my father's horrified gaze. The weight in my hands carried a freezing chill. Yet it inexplicably brought a trace of satisfaction to my dormant heart. It is well that the eldest Miss Yen likes it. Having completed his task, Lu Xing was originally prepared to turn and leave, but his footsteps suddenly halted as his gaze swept over Rongju, who was standing to the side, trying his best to maintain the poise of a noble gentleman. He narrowed his eyes slightly, as if spotting some intriguing prey. A smirk of blatant mockery curled his lips as he turned slowly, fixing Rongju with a gaze and speaking in a chilling tone. Are you, sir, the heir apparent Rong of the Marquis of Schwamping's estate? Rongju's expression stiffened. He struggled to maintain the refined air of a noble scion, but as he cupped his hands in a formal salute, his knuckles had already turned a faint white. I am. May I ask what guidance Lord Lu has for me? I wouldn't dare offer guidance. Lu Xing let out a bone-chilling sneer, his gaze scraping over Rongju's feigned composure like a blade. It is simply that my master has heard the threshold of the Marquis of Schwamping's estate has grown exceptionally high these days. You covet the vast dowry left behind by the Chui family, yet you indulge yourself in clandestine affairs with that low-born concubine's daughter. As these words were spoken, Rongju felt as if he had been struck by lightning, his knees trembling uncontrollably. Just how far-reaching were the eyes and ears of the brocade guards? It had been barely half an hour since the incident in the ancestral hall, yet every single word had already reached the ears of that living Yama. The Grand Secretary misunderstands. Second Miss Yen and I are innocent. There is absolutely no. Rongju's face was deathly pale as he scrambled to explain himself. Shut up. Lu Xing interrupted him ruthlessly, his voice suddenly turning cold and laced with chilling murderous intent. My master has ordered that since this forced union is a bitter fruit, the vine should be severed early. If the Marquis of Xianping is loath to return the exorbitant betrothal gifts set by Lady Yan back then, the brocade guards. Imperial prison has plenty of torture racks to help the Marquis settle the accounts slowly. A threat, a blatant, naked threat. In this era of shifting imperial power, with Wei Yuan's influence eclipsing the very heavens, an old, declining noble house like the Marquis of Schwamping's could not afford to provoke even a single finger of his. I watched cold-eyed as Rongju stood there, swaying and disheveled. The pent-up resentment from my past life finally began to dissipate, leaving me feeling immensely gratified. I took a step forward, my voice crisp and resonant. Did you hear that clearly, Heir Rong? It is not that I, Yen Shu, am unworthy of your high status, but rather that a fickle, spineless hypocrite like you is utterly unworthy of the 10-mile dowry my mother left behind. With the commander of the brocade guards here as a witness today, this engagement is hereby annulled. I turned my head toward my father, whose face had already turned ashen with terror. Though my tone remained respectful, it carried an uncompromising hardness. Father, first thing tomorrow morning, I will send a steward with the original gift list to the Marquis' manor to inventory the returned items. If so much as a single thread is missing, I shall hold the Marquis of Schwamping's household accountable. Surely father supports me in upholding the dignity of the Ministry of Rights. Household? My father's Adam's apple bobbed convulsively. He had originally hoped to use this marriage alliance with the Marquis' manor to pave his way in court, but now that Wei Yuan had made it clear he was backing me, father wouldn't dare utter a single no even if he were given 10 times his usual courage. He could only stiffly avert his gaze and nod with great difficulty. Lu Xing, seeing this, brushed the faint dust off his flying fish robe with satisfaction. He gave me a slight cupped hand salute and said, if eldest Miss Yen encounters any obstacles while taking inventory of her dowry, simply take this cloud breaker to the North Pacification Department to report the case. This official shall take his leave. It was only when the footsteps of the embroidered uniform guard had completely vanished from the front courtyard that the deathly silence in the hall was broken by heavy, ragged breathing. Yan Zheng's eyes were bloodshot as he stared fixedly at the red sandalwood box in my hands. He hissed through gritted teeth, Yan Shu, do you think that by clinging to a murderous, treacherous official like Wei Yuan, you can act with such lawless impunity? You use these tactics to force Heir Rong to break the engagement and ruined Wanner's reputation. You will get your retribution sooner or later. Watch your words, brother. I toyed with the ruby-encrusted dagger, the eerie glint from the blade illuminating my cold features. Criticizing the Grand Secretary of the Imperial Court is an offense punishable by having one's tongue ripped out. If you feel the 9 generations of the minister's household have lived quite long enough, by all means, go shout it in the streets. Yan Jing was left speechless by my words, his chest heaving violently. I couldn't be bothered to look at this utterly hypocritical pair of siblings any longer. I walked straight to my father, the corners of my lips curling into a gentle yet chilling arc. Since the engagement has been called off, and I, the legitimate daughter, have essentially returned from the gates of hell. Father, don't you think it's time to take the management tokens for the Yen household and the keys to my mother's private treasury back from concubine Lu and return them to me? My father's entire body jolted, just as he was about to assume his position as an elder to scold me for my lack of propriety. A flurry of footsteps, more panicked and heavier than when the Imperial Guards had entered, suddenly echoed from outside the door. The old butler stumbled over the threshold once again, scrambling across the floor on all fours. His voice trembled with a near-suffocating terror. Master, the Grand Secretary's carriage hasn't left. Lord Wei's personal attendants have brought a sedan chair. They say they are waiting outside the main gate specifically for the eldest miss to board. My father's face, slightly distorted by extreme terror, underwent a transformation from haughty superiority to abject servility in a single instant. He practically scrambled toward me on all fours, no longer caring for the decorum of seniority. Lowering his voice, he spoke with a trembling tone that bordered on pleading. Sure, since Lord Wei has personally sent a sedan chair, you must not be difficult. Once you are before his lordship, you must be cautious in word and deed, and be sure to put in a few good words for your father. I lowered my eyes, coldly observing this good father who, in my past life, had watched indifferently as my hamstrings were severed. I felt only a profound sense of absurdity. The familial protection I had so desperately craved in my previous life could not even withstand a single, casual glance from a powerful official. Rest assured, father, I know what to do. I tucked the red sandalwood box containing the dagger into my sleeve, without sparing a single glance for Yan Yuan, who was collapsed on the floor, or Yan Jing, whose face was livid. I turned and strode out of that nauseating hall. Outside the manor gates, an unremarkable green woolen sedan chair sat quietly in the night. 4 guards from the embroidered uniform guard stood around it like iron towers. The surrounding streets had long since been cleared, and it was so silent that even the rustle of wind through the leaves was clearly audible. Without a moment's hesitation, I leaned over, lifted the sedan curtain, and stepped inside. The sedan rose with remarkable stability. It didn't travel far, merely turning into a dead-end alley behind the minister's residence. When the curtain was lifted again, what met my eyes was a spacious agarwood carriage, surrounded by shadows, hidden guards holding their breath in silence. Get in. A deep, lazy voice drifted from inside the carriage. It carried the casual indifference of one long accustomed to high status, yet possessed an underlying pressure that was impossible to ignore. I took a deep breath of the air, which carried a hint of nocturnal chill, lifted my skirt to step onto the footstool, and bent down to enter the carriage. No lamps were lit inside the carriage. Only a faint sliver of moonlight leaked through the gap in the window, outlining the silhouette of the man reclining in the primary seat. Wei Yuan was dressed in a black robe embroidered with golden pythons, idly fiddling with a string of high-quality sandalwood prayer beads. Those narrow eyes, which remained as sharp as blades even in the darkness, were scrutinizing me with a half-smile. The eldest Miss Yen is quite bold indeed. Wei Yuan rubbed the prayer beads with his thumb, producing a faint clicking sound. The ruthlessness you showed back there behind the rockery, smashing your own sister's head with a stone, was truly an eye-opener for me. What is it? Now that you are facing me alone in this cramped space, your hands aren't even shaking? For someone who has died once already, if I didn't even have this much courage, how would I be worthy of receiving your cloud piercer? Meeting his gaze, I sat down on the soft couch opposite him without the slightest hesitation, my tone as calm as if I were discussing today's weather. Wei Yuan's movement of fiddling with the prayer beads paused slightly, a glint of playful light flickering in the depths of his eyes. Died once? I knew I had misspoken, yet I had no intention of covering it up. Naturally, I would not reveal the full secret of living a second life. but to gain a foothold before a powerful minister like Wei Yuan, a man naturally suspicious and possessing intelligence bordering on the demonic, honesty regarding my ambition and ruthlessness was my best bargaining chip. Your Excellency deals with a myriad of state affairs daily. Yet today you specifically took the time to visit the backyard of the minister's manor to watch a domestic farce, and even ordered Commander Liu to publicly suppress the Marquis of Schwamping's estate. I did not follow his bait, instead cutting straight to the point. The Grand Secretary has gone to such lengths to back me up. Surely it isn't truly because my grace, while swinging a club, was so breathtaking? Wei Yuan let out a low chuckle, the sound vibrating within the narrow carriage with a hint of dangerous pleasure. He leaned forward, and a shadow carrying the scent of faint sandalwood and a trace of blood instantly enveloped me. Yen Shu, you are indeed clever. Far cleverer than that straw man of a father of yours, who knows nothing but how to flatter and scheme. Wei Yuan stared into my eyes. His voice dropped low. Since you are a sensible person, I shall not beat around the bush. The Marquis of Schwamping's estate has suffered massive deficits these past few years. Yet they managed to maintain a facade of blooming prosperity, and even have the surplus to secretly recruit soldiers and buy horses. Do you know where their money comes from? My heart skipped a beat. In that moment, the tangled threads of my past life suddenly snapped into a clear line. In my previous life, the reason the Marquis of Schwamping's household refused to let me go was that my maternal grandfather's family, the CUIS, possessed wealth that could rival a nation. Under the guise of managing my dowry, they had long since drained the shops, estates, and even the liquid silver my mother left behind to fill the bottomless pit of their salt smuggling and secret weapon manufacturing. And my death, it was because I had accidentally stumbled upon Yan Zheng and Rongju conspiring in the study to destroy the ledgers. They touched my mother's dowry and used it for business that would cost them their heads. I gripped the dagger hidden in my sleeve, the hatred in my eyes nearly erupting into something tangible. And you, my lord, need that salt smuggling ledger hidden within the Marquis' estate, the one recording their secret collusions with court officials, as the ironclad evidence to completely uproot the Marquis of Xinping and my father's faction. A look of undisguised admiration finally surfaced in Wei Yuan's eyes. He tossed the prayer beads in his hand onto the low table and leaned back slightly. That old fox, the Marquis of Xinping, hid the ledgers incredibly deep. The brocade guards have been investigating secretly for months without finding their exact location. However, I have discovered that the ledger's hidden compartment is tucked away in a secret drawer of the red sandalwood, thousand-worker, canopy bed that was part of the late Lady Chui's dowry. That explained everything. In my past life, after Yan Wan married into the Marquis' manor as a concubine's daughter, the first thing she did, under the pretext of cleansing the eldest sister's bad luck, was to ostentatiously replace all the furniture in my courtyard. Only that canopy bed was personally ordered by Rongju to be moved into his private storehouse. So, Your Excellency needs me to go to the Marquis' manor legitimately, under the guise of inventorying my dowry following the broken engagement, to bring that ledger out. I calmly finished his thought. Correct. Wei Yuan looked at me as if appraising a perfectly balanced, peerless weapon. This is a trade. You get the ledger for me, and I will lend you the influence of the brocade guards, allowing you to walk through the capital with impunity. You want the Marquis of Schwamping's house ruined, and you want those vicious siblings of yours to suffer a fate worse than death. I can grant you all of it. Deal. I nodded without hesitation, then looked up, fixing my gaze on this living Yama who held absolute power over the court. But I have one more condition. Speak. Tomorrow morning, I will take men to the Marquis of Schwamping's estate to inventory my dowry. The Marquis keeps many death-sworn guards, and my father will surely try to send word in secret. I placed the red sandalwood box on the table, my fingertips lightly tapping the lid. I need you, Commander Liu, to personally lead the squad and seal off the estate. Not a single fly is to be let out. The vermilion gates of the Marquis of Schwamping's estate were hacked open by the brute force of the embroidered uniform guard's spring blossom blades. Amidst the flying wood chips, I stepped over the high threshold. Behind me, Liu Jin led 200 guards in flying fish robes, surging in like a black tide, instantly sealing off this century-old noble estate as tight as an iron bucket. The chilling killing intent startled the morning birds in the courtyard and completely tore away the last shred of the Marquis' dignity. The Marquis of Xinping had not even finished dressing in his court robes. He rushed to the front courtyard with disheveled hair, trembling with rage. Yan Shu! How dare you lead these curs to force your way into the Marquis's manor? Even if the engagement is broken, are you trying to start a rebellion? Rongju followed behind him, his usual facade of noble refinement completely gone. His face was ashen as he pointed at me. You venomous woman. It's one thing to break the engagement, but to cause such a massive scene, are you trying to drive us to our deaths? I let out a cold sneer and pulled a long scroll of the gift list from my sleeve, ruthlessly slapping it against Rongju's face, which was twisted in shock and fury. Does Rong truly believe that the 100,000 taels of silver and 2 gold mines my Chui family provided as a dowry back then were given to your manor for free as a death warrant? We settle the accounts today. If a single copper coin is missing, I shall take the heads of the Marquis's household to fill the gap. Ignoring their terrified clamor and attempts to stop me, I led the embroidered uniform guard straight toward Rongju's private storehouse. In my past life, Yan Yuan had sold off every single item in my courtyard, save for that Zeton with 1,000-work canopy bed, which Rongju had moved here overnight under the pretext that the timber was precious. The moment the storehouse doors were kicked open, a flash of extreme panic flickered in Rongju's eyes. He abruptly unsheathed a sword hanging from the wall, standing before the canopy bed like a cornered, maddened beast. Back off! Who dares touch this prince's private property? Private property? I drew Cloudbreaker from my sleeve, its ghostly blue blade shimmering with a bone-chilling frost in the morning light. I stepped forward without yielding an inch, my gaze locked onto a highly concealed auspicious beast carving at the bottom left corner of the bed frame. In my past life, I was bound here with my hamstrings severed, forced to watch them conspire before this hidden compartment and hear their cruel sentence to silence me forever. That bone-deep hatred now transformed entirely into the force of the strike. I swung downward. I gripped the dagger in a reverse hold and slammed the hilt against the carving with all my might. With a soft mechanical click, the agarwood panel sprang open, revealing a heavy ledger tightly wrapped in oilcloth lying quietly inside. As if his vital point had been struck, Rongju lunged at me with eyes nearly bursting from their sockets. You bitch! Die! Before his blade could reach me, Lu Zhang's Sichuan sword was already out of its sheath. With a sharp clang, he flicked the sword away and immediately delivered a heavy kick to the back of Rongju's knee. Accompanied by the crisp sound of breaking bone, this normally high-end mighty noble son collapsed at my feet with a scream, looking like a heap of rotting mud. I leaned over to pick up the ledger, coldly brushing off the dust and flipping through a few pages at random. The massive turnover of smuggled salt, funds for the clandestine manufacturing of weapons, and the detailed distribution of spoils among court officials, every word and sentence was ironclad evidence for the execution of 9 generations. On the most recent page, I was not at all surprised to see my father's private seal, representing his status as minister. The Marquis of Xuanping's estate is suspected of treason, and Minister Yan is guilty of embezzlement and factionalism. I handed the account books to Lu Zhang, looking down at Rongju, whose face was ashen and who was shaking like a leaf. Rong, weren't you just asking me about the law? This is the law. Lu Zhang raised his hand and coldly delivered the sentence. Seize them all and throw them into the imperial prison. Anyone who resists is to be executed on the spot. Wails and pleas for mercy instantly pierced the skies. I knew that after today, the Marquis of Xuanping's estate would cease to exist in the capital. My father, who thought he could protect himself, Auntie Lu, who spent her life scheming, and Yan Yuan, who was still lost in her grand dream of becoming the heir's consort, all of them would be ground into dust in this overturning storm of power. I turned and walked out of this desperate, dead-end game. Outside the gates of the Marquis's estate, the rising sun broke through the lingering haze of the past few days, illuminating the bluestone path with a piercing clarity. The familiar agarwood carriage had stopped at the street corner at some point. The curtain was half-rolled, and Wei Yuan sat upright inside, his black gold-woven robes shimmering with a dark golden luster in the morning light. He watched me quietly, those deep, narrow eyes no longer filled with condescending scrutiny, but rather a sense of certainty and admiration reserved for an equal. This performance of yours, eldest Miss Yan, was executed quite cleanly indeed, he said, his voice low and carrying a hint of lingering amusement. I walked to the carriage, sheathed the Cloudbreaker blade, which was still dusted with a bit of wood shavings, and tilted my chin slightly to meet his gaze. I have obtained what you desired, my lord. I only wonder, is this blade of mine to your liking? Wei Yuan let out a low chuckle. He reached out with his well-defined hand, lightly gripping my wrist, and pulled me into the carriage with an irresistible force. It fits perfectly. He gazed into my eyes, his warm breath brushing past my ear, his voice carrying the arrogance of one who rules the world in a deep intensity reserved only for me. Since you have entered my game and borrowed my influence, then for the rest of this life, Yen Shu, you can only be held in my hands. I did not pull away. Instead, I reached back and grasped his slightly cool fingertips. I have reached the end of that muddy, dark alley filled with blood and tears from my past life. In this life, I have not only exacted my revenge and preserved my mother's reputation and estate, but I have also found someone capable of playing this treacherous game of court politics by my side. Since he dares to hold the blade, I do not mind joining this world-renowned, living Yama, to carve out a truly magnificent path across the vast territory of the Great Zhou. The story has come to an end. Thank you for listening. Please feel free to subscribe, like, share, and comment. Thank you.